I'm Sarah Mitchell, 34, and for 3 years I've been serving coffee and cleaning tables at Corner Café while my family treated me like the family failure. My brother Jake, the golden child with his fancy business degree, would bring his friends by just to watch me work, their laughter echoing through the small-town diner. "Look at my sister, the career waitress," he'd say, while Mom nodded along, disappointed but not surprised. What they didn't know was that I'd been quietly building something extraordinary, a tech startup that would soon make me a millionaire. The day I walked into that cafe as its new owner, the look on Jake's face was worth every humiliating moment I'd endured. But firing him? That was just the beginning of what my family would discover about the sister they'd so carelessly dismissed. The bell above the cafe door chimed with a familiar, mocking tone. I didn't need to look up from wiping down the counter to know who had walked in. Jake's voice carried across the small space, loud and theatrical as always. "Gentlemen, welcome to my sister's kingdom," he announced to his 3 colleagues from the marketing firm downtown. They were all wearing expensive suits, their shoes polished to perfection, looking completely out of place in our small-town diner with its cracked vinyl booths and faded checkered floor. I kept my head down, focusing on the coffee stain that refused to come out of the Formica counter. The stain had been there for months, a permanent reminder of the hundreds of cups I'd served, the thousands of times I'd performed this same routine. "Sarah," Jake called out, his voice dripping with false cheerfulness. "Could we get a table for 4? And maybe you could tell my friends about your illustrious career path?" His colleagues chuckled, and I felt my cheeks burn. I grabbed 4 menus from behind the register, my hands trembling slightly. This wasn't the first time Jake had brought his work friends here for entertainment, and it wouldn't be the last. "Right this way," I said, my voice steady despite the storm brewing inside me. As I led them to a corner booth, I caught snippets of their conversation. MBA from State University. One of them was saying about Jake. "Youngest account manager they've ever promoted. And your sister works here?" Another asked, not bothering to lower his voice. "Well, everyone has different ambitions," Jake replied, pulling out his business card and placing it deliberately on the table. The card was thick, expensive stock with raised lettering. "Jake Mitchell, Senior Account Manager, Pinnacle Marketing Solutions." I set down the menus with more force than necessary. "Can I start you off with something to drink?" "Just coffee for everyone," Jake said, then added with a grin, "Make it strong. We've got real work to do after this." The word real hit me like a physical blow, as if what I did here wasn't real work. As if the 60-hour weeks, the aching feet, the constant smile I maintained for every customer didn't matter. I returned to the counter and started preparing their coffee. My movements automatic after 3. Years of practice. Through the serving window, I could see them huddled around Jake's phone, probably looking at some campaign he was working on. Their laughter punctuated the air, each burst feeling like another nail in the coffin of my dignity. "Sarah's always been the creative type," I heard Jake explaining. "Never really focused on practical things like business or finance. Mom always said she'd figure it out eventually, but ... He let the sentence hang in the air, and I gripped the coffee pot so tightly my knuckles went white. The irony was almost unbearable. If only they knew what I'd been building in secret, the lines of code I'd been writing until 3 in the morning, the clients I'd been landing with my app development skills. But I said nothing. I carried their coffee to the table with a smile that felt like it might crack my face in half. "Thank you, sweetheart," Jake said, using the condescending tone he perfected over the years. "You know, maybe someday you'll find your calling. It's never too late to start over." Start over. As if I hadn't already started something incredible. As if I wasn't already succeeding beyond anything he could imagine. That night, after my shift ended, I would go home to my small apartment and work on my startup until dawn. I would review proposals, write code, and build something that would change everything. But for now, I just nodded and walked away, letting them think they knew the whole story. They had no idea that their mockery was only fueling my determination. The family photo sits on Mom's mantelpiece, a shrine to Jake's achievements that I pass every time I visit. There he is at 22, cap and gown, diploma in hand, with mom and dad beaming beside him. I'm in the background, barely visible, having dropped out of college the year before to help dad with his medical bills. I remember that day clearly, the way mom's eyes sparkled with pride as she introduced Jake to every neighbor, every friend, every stranger who would listen. "My son, the business graduate," she'd say, her voice filled with the kind of satisfaction I never heard when talking about me. Sarah was always the artistic one. She'd add as an afterthought, as if creativity were some sort of consolation. Prize. She'd find her way eventually. But I had found my way, just not the way they expected. While Jake was learning about market segmentation and profit margins in lecture halls, I was working double shifts at a local diner to keep our family afloat. When Dad's heart attack drained our savings, I was the one who stepped up, who sacrificed my own dreams to make sure the bills got paid. Jake never knew about the nights I stayed up crying, wondering if I made the right choice. He never knew about the college acceptance letters I'd hidden in my bedroom drawer, the scholarships I'd let expire, the future I'd given up so he could have his dot. The favoritism wasn't new. It had started when we were children, subtle at first, then increasingly obvious as we grew older. Jake was the son who would carry on the family name, who would achieve great things. I was the daughter who would eventually get married and become someone else's responsibility. Jake has such a head for business, Mom would say when he was still in elementary school, watching him organize his Pokemon cards with the methodical precision of a future executive. He's going to be very successful someday. When I showed interest in computers, building my first website at age 12, the response was different. "That's nice, dear," Mom would say, barely looking up from her magazine. "Just make sure you don't spend too much time on that computer. You need to focus on more important things, like cooking and cleaning and learning to be a proper young lady," while Jake was encouraged to join the debate team and take advanced math classes. I was signed up for home economics and encouraged to help with household chores. The day I told them I was dropping out of college to work full-time was the day I realized I'd never be enough. Jake was a junior then, thriving in his business program, talking excitedly about internships and career prospects. I was a sophomore studying computer science, barely keeping up with tuition payments despite my part-time job. "Dad needs help with the medical bills," I'd said, sitting at our kitchen table while Mom processed insurance claims. "I can work more hours if I'm not in school." "Oh, sweetheart," Mom had replied, her tone gentle but resigned. "Are you sure? I mean, college isn't really for everyone." She never would have said that to Jake, never would have suggested that he sacrifice his education for the family. But for me, it was almost expected. The dutiful daughter putting everyone else's needs before her own. That night, alone in my childhood bedroom, I made a promise to myself. I would prove them wrong. I would show them that I was capable of more than they ever imagined. I would build something extraordinary, something that would make Jake's fancy degree look like a participation trophy. I just never thought it would take this long, or hurt this much. The photo on the mantelpiece serves as a daily reminder of what I lost, but also what I'm fighting to regain. Not their approval, I've moved beyond needing that, but my own sense of worth, my own place in this family, my own version of success. Every morning when I put on my cafe uniform, I remember that day. Every time Jake brings his friends by to mock me, I remember the choice I made and the price I paid. But I also remember the promise I made to myself in that dark bedroom all those years ago. I'm still keeping that promise. And soon, very soon, everyone will see exactly what I've been building in the shadows. The laptop was ancient by any reasonable standard, a refurbished ThinkPad I bought with 3 months' worth of tip money. Its screen flickered occasionally, the battery lasted maybe 2 hours, and the fan sounded like a dying vacuum cleaner. But it was mine? Every dent, every scratch, every slow boot-up sequence represented my determination to claw my way towards something better. I'd set it up on the small desk in my studio apartment, the one I'd furnished entirely from thrift stores and garage sales. The apartment itself was nothing special, a converted basement with thin walls and a leak in the bathroom ceiling, but It was my sanctuary. The place where I could shed the cafe uniform and become someone else entirely. It started with curiosity. During my lunch breaks at Corner Café, I'd read technology blogs on my phone, fascinated by stories of people who'd built apps in their spare time and sold them for millions. The idea seemed impossible at first me, a college dropout working for minimum wage. Creating something that sophisticated people would actually pay for. But the more I read, the more I realized that the barriers weren't as high as I'd thought. Programming languages could be learned online. Development tools were freely available. The only thing standing between me and success was my own willingness to work for it. I started with YouTube tutorials, staying up until 2 in the morning, watching Indian programmers explain JavaScript fundamentals. My eyes would burn from staring at the screen, but I couldn't stop. Each new concept I mastered felt like a small victory, a step away from the life I'd been living and towards something I could barely imagine. The first program I wrote was embarrassingly simple, a basic calculator that could add and subtract numbers. But when I clicked the button and saw the result appear on screen, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. Pride. Not the hollow pride of serving coffee with a smile, but the deep satisfaction of creating something from nothing. "What are you working on over there?" My neighbor, Mrs. Chun, asked one evening, having knocked on my door to complain about the noise from my ancient laptop fan. "Learning to code," I said, not sure if she'd understand. She looked at me for a long moment, then smiled. "My grandson does that. Makes good money, too. You're smart to learn it." It was the first encouragement I've received in years, and it meant more than she could have known. Months passed. I devoured online courses, built small projects, and slowly began to understand the logic behind the code. The cafe work became even more tedious by comparison, my body going through the motions while my mind raced with possibilities. The breakthrough came when I overheard 2 customers complaining about their small business inventory system. They were spending hours each week manually tracking stock, entering data into spreadsheets, and trying to predict what they need to order. "There has to be a better way," the woman said, frustrated. "But all the software we've looked at is either too expensive or too complicated." That night, I sketched out my first real business idea. A simple, affordable inventory management system designed specifically for small businesses. Not revolutionary, but useful. Something that could actually help people like those customers. I spent the next 6 months building it, testing it, refining it. Every free moment was dedicated to the project. I'd wake up at 5 in the morning to code before my cafe shift, then come home and work until midnight. My social life, already limited, disappeared entirely. The isolation was worth it when I launched the beta version and signed up my first 10 users. They were all small business owners who found my website through online forums, people who understood the pain point I was trying to solve. "This is exactly what we needed," one of them wrote in an email. "How much do you charge for the full version?" I stared at that email for 20 minutes, hardly believing it was real. Someone was willing to pay for something I built. Someone valued my work enough to give me money for it. My hands shook as I typed back a price $29 per month, which seemed absurdly high for something I created in my basement apartment. But they agreed immediately, and within a week, I had my first paying customer. The money wasn't life-changing. $29 wouldn't even cover my grocery budget, but it represented something far more valuable, proof that I could build something people wanted, something that solved real problems in the real world. At the cafe the next day, I caught myself smiling while I cleaned tables. Jake happened to walk by during his lunch break, saw me wiping down the same counter I'd been cleaning for 3 years, and shook his head with familiar disappointment. "Still living the dream, I see," he said. I just nodded and kept working, my secret burning bright inside me like a small flame. He had no idea that his failure of his sister had just become an entrepreneur. He had no idea that this was only the beginning. The business registration documents were folded carefully inside a manila envelope, hidden beneath my winter sweaters in the bottom drawer of my dresser. Mitchell Tech Solutions, LLC, was now officially registered with the state of Ohio, though I doubted anyone in my family would have believed it if they'd seen the papers. Every morning, I'd touch the envelope before getting dressed for my cafe shift. a reminder that I was building something real. The legal entity gave weight to what had started as a hobby, transforming my late-night coding sessions into an actual business venture. My second customer came through a referral from my first, a small bakery owner who'd heard about my inventory system through her business networking group. She paid up front for 6 months of service, bringing my monthly revenue to $174. Still not enough to quit my day job, but enough to prove that word-of-mouth marketing was working. The juggling act was exhausting. I'd serve coffee and sandwiches from 6 in the morning until 2 in the afternoon, then rush home to handle customer support emails and bug fixes. Evenings were dedicated to developing new features and reaching out to potential clients. My apartment became a fortress of productivity. I'd set up a standing desk from stacked books, pinned user feedback to the wall, and created a detailed business plan that I'd review every night before bed. The plan was ambitious: 50 customers by year's end, 100 by the following summer. Enough revenue to quit the cafe and work on my business full-time. "You look tired," Mom observed during one of our monthly family dinners at her house. "Are you getting enough sleep?" I pushed mashed potatoes around my plate, fighting the urge to tell her about the 18-hour days I was pulling to build something extraordinary. "Work's been busy," I said instead. Jake looked up from his phone, where he'd been scrolling through LinkedIn updates. "Busy at the cafe? What, did they finally teach you how to make a decent latte?" The family laughed, including Mom, who covered her mouth with her napkin as if that made the cruelty more polite. I smiled along, playing my part in the familiar dynamic. The underachiever sister, the family disappointment, the one who'd never quite figure out how to be successful. If only they knew about the business proposal I'd submitted to a potential client that morning, or the 3-hour phone call I'd had with a developer in California who wanted to license my code. If only they knew that I'd already made more money in the past month than I'd ever made in tips. But I kept quiet. Something told me that the secrecy was important, that revealing my progress too early would somehow diminish it. Maybe it was years of being dismissed, but I needed to prove to myself that this was real before I could prove it to anyone else. The breakthrough came when I landed my first major client, a chain of 5 hardware stores that needed a comprehensive inventory management system. The owner, a gruff man named Frank who'd built his business from nothing, understood exactly what I was trying to solve. "These big software companies don't get it," he said during our initial phone call. "They want to charge us thousands for features we don't need. Your system is simple, effective, and affordable. When can we start?" The contract was worth $500 per month, more than double what I was making at the cafe. I signed it with trembling hands, then immediately began working on the custom features Frank needed. The development process pushed me to my limits. I was learning advanced programming concepts on the fly, building database structures I'd only read about in tutorials, and troubleshooting problems that had no easy solutions. There were nights I fell asleep at my desk, still wearing my cafe uniform, surrounded by empty coffee cups and scribbled notes. But I was building something valuable, something that made people's lives easier and their businesses more profitable. The feedback from customers was overwhelmingly positive, and my confidence grew with each successful implementation. "I don't know how we manage without this," Frank told me during one of our weekly check-ins. "You've saved us hours of work every week." Hours of work. That was the real value proposition, not just organizing inventory, but giving business owners back their time. Time they could spend with their families, growing their businesses, or simply relaxing after a long day. The irony wasn't lost on. While my family worried about my lack of direction, I was helping other families by solving their business problems. While they saw me as someone who couldn't manage her own life, I was managing complex technical projects and building lasting relationships with clients. By month 6, I had 12 paying customers and was generating over $800 in monthly revenue. The money was starting to add up, accumulating in a separate business account that I checked obsessively. For the first time in my adult life, I had savings. Real savings, not just enough to cover next month's rent. The cafe work became increasingly difficult to bear. Every order I took, every table I cleaned, every condescending comment from Jake felt like a betrayal of my true potential. I was living a double life, and the strain was beginning to show. "You seem distracted lately," my manager mentioned one afternoon. "Everything okay?" I assured her I was fine, but the truth was that I was counting down the days until I could leave, until I could shed this persona and reveal who I really was, until I could show my family and myself that I was capable of so much more than they'd ever imagined. The email arrived on a Tuesday morning while I was refilling the sugar dispensers at Corner Café. My phone buzzed, and I glanced at the screen expecting another customer support request or billing question. Instead, I saw a subject line that made my heart skip. "Partnership opportunity, regional restaurant chain." I almost dropped the sugar container. The sender was Marcus Rivera, IT director for Hometown Diners, a growing chain of family restaurants across the Midwest. He'd found my website through a referral from one of my hardware store clients, and he was interested in discussing a much larger implementation of my inventory system. "We have 37 locations and growing," his email read. "Our current system is outdated and expensive. Your solution looks exactly like what we need. Are you available for a call this week to discuss pricing for an enterprise deployment? 37 locations." I sat down heavily in the break room, my hands shaking as I read the email again. This wasn't just another small business looking for basic inventory management. This was a major opportunity, the kind that could change everything. I called Marcus that evening, my stomach churning with nervous energy. He was direct and professional, explaining their current pain points and the features they needed. The conversation lasted 90 minutes, and by the end, I knew I was in over my head, but in the best possible way. "Based on what you've described, I think we can definitely help," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Let me put together a proposal for you." "Great. What kind of timeline are we looking at for implementation?" I thought about my current workload, my cafe schedule, the complexity of scaling my system for 37 locations. 6 months for full deployment, I said, hoping I wasn't overpromising. "Perfect. And pricing?" This was the moment I'd been preparing for since I'd started the business. I took a deep breath and quoted a number that seemed astronomical to someone who'd been earning minimum wage 6 months earlier. $50,000 for setup and customization, plus $1,500 monthly for ongoing support and hosting. There was a pause that felt like it lasted forever. "That's very competitive," Marcus said finally. "Send me the proposal, and if everything looks good, we'll move forward with a contract." I hung up the phone and stared at the wall of my tiny apartment. $50,000. In one deal, I would earn more than I'd made in 2 years at the cafe. More than Jake probably made in 6 months at his marketing firm. The next 3 weeks were a blur of proposal writing, technical specifications, and contract negotiations. I worked every free moment, researching enterprise-level security requirements, scalability concerns, and support infrastructure. The proposal grew to 43 pages, complete with implementation timelines, training schedules, and detailed pricing breakdowns. When I finally submitted it, I felt like I was sending a piece of my soul into the world. This wasn't just a business proposal, it was proof that I could compete at a level I never imagined possible. The response came faster than expected. Marcus called on a Friday afternoon while I was cleaning the espresso machine at the cafe. "Sarah, I've reviewed your proposal with our executive team," he said. "We're impressed. We'd like to move forward with the full implementation." I nearly dropped the phone. "Really? You want to proceed?" "We do. I'm sending over the contract today. Once you sign it, we'll wire the initial payment." I excused myself to the restroom, locked the door, and allowed myself 60 seconds of silent celebration. Then I splashed cold water on my face, composed myself, and returned to work as if nothing had happened, but everything had happened. In that moment, I crossed the threshold from small business owner to serious entrepreneur. I was no longer just someone with a decent idea and a few customers. I was someone who could land major contracts and deliver enterprise-level solutions. The contract arrived that evening, 12 pages of legal language that made my head spin. I read every word twice, then hired a lawyer to review it before signing. The professionalism felt surreal. Me, the cafe waitress, working with attorneys and negotiating with corporate executives. The initial payment hit my bank account 3 days later. $50,000. I stared at the balance on my computer screen, hardly believing it was real. In one transaction, I'd earned more money than I'd ever seen in my life. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept checking my bank account, afraid the money might disappear like some kind of mirage, but it was real. The balance was real. The contract was real. The business I'd built in secret was finally, undeniably real. At the cafe the next morning, I served coffee and eggs with a smile that felt different. Not the forced smile of someone going through the motions, but the genuine smile of someone who knew a secret. Someone who was building something extraordinary while everyone around them remained completely oblivious. Jake came in for lunch, as he did every week, bringing 2 colleagues from his marketing firm. They ordered their usual turkey sandwiches and coffee and made their usual comments about my career choice. "Still enjoying the service industry?" one of them asked with a smirk. "Absolutely," I replied, refilling their coffee cups. "I'm learning so much about business operations and customer service." They laughed, thinking I was being naive. But I wasn't talking about the cafe. I was talking about the business I'd built, the enterprise-level software implementation I was managing, the corporate relationships I was developing. I was talking about the $50,000 sitting in my business account and the $100,000 more that would follow as I completed the project. I was talking about the future I was building, one line of code at a time. The BMW keys landed on Mom's dining room table with a deliberate clink, the silver metal catching the light from the chandelier above. Jake had tossed them casually next to the bread basket, but I knew the gesture was anything but casual. Everything Jake did was calculated to maximum effect. "New car?" Dad asked, reaching for the keys to examine the BMW logo. 2024 M3, Jake said, unable to suppress his grin. Figured it was time to upgrade. The promotion came with a nice bonus. "Promotion?" Mom's voice pitched higher with excitement. "You didn't tell us about a promotion." "Senior account director," Jake announced, straightening his tie. "Youngest person in the company's history to reach that level. They're giving me my own team in a corner office." The congratulations flowed around the table like wine at a celebration. Mom beamed with pride. Dad clapped Jake on the shoulder, and even my aunt and uncle joined in the chorus of approval. I sat at the far end of the table, cutting my pot roast into increasingly smaller pieces, trying to make myself invisible. "What's the salary jump?" Dad asked, his businessman's curiosity getting the better of him. "Let's just say I'm doing very well," Jake replied with false modesty. "Well enough to afford the car, anyway." "And to think," Mom said, glancing meaningfully in my direction, "just 3 years ago, you were both living at home after college." The implication hung in the air like smoke. Jake had launched himself into success while I had stagnated in a dead-end job. The golden child had fulfilled his potential while the problem child continued to disappoint. "Well, I never finished college," I said quietly, immediately regretting the words. "That's right," Jake said, his tone shifting to something that sounded sympathetic but felt patronizing. "You know, Sarah, it's not too late. You could go back to school, get a degree in something practical. Business, maybe. Or hospitality management that would build on your current experience." Current experience. He made 3 years of cafe work sound like a career path rather than a holding pattern. "I appreciate the suggestion," I said, forcing a smile. "But I'm actually pretty happy where I am." The silence that followed was deafening. Happy? At a minimum wage job? The family exchanged glances that spoke volumes about their assessment of my judgment. "Sweetheart," Mom said gently, "we just want you to have security, to build something for yourself. Jake's worked so hard to get where he is." "I know he has," I replied, meaning it. Jake had worked hard. He'd networked aggressively, stayed late at the office, and played the corporate game with skill and determination. His success was earned, which somehow made it worse. "The thing is," Jake continued, warming to his favorite topic, "in business, you have to think strategically. You can't just coast along hoping things will work out. You have to set goals, make plans, take calculated risks." He was talking about me, though he'd never say it directly. I was the one coasting along, the one without goals or plans, the one who was afraid to take risks, like buying a BMW. I asked, trying to keep my tone light. Exactly. Jake missed the subtle edge in my voice. Image matters in business. Clients need to see that you're successful, that you're someone they can trust with their accounts. This car is an investment in my career. How much did it cost? I asked, though I immediately regretted the question. It sounded petty, like I was trying to diminish his achievement. Base price was $68,000, Jake said proudly. But I loaded it with options, leather seats, premium sound system, the works. Final price was about $85,000. More than I'd made in 3 years of cafe work. More than most people in our small town made in 2 years, but less than I'd made in the past 6 months from my software business. The irony was exquisite. While Jake was buying a car to project success, I was quietly building actual success. While he was investing in his image, I was investing in my future. While he was trying to look like a winner, I was actually becoming one. That's a lot of money, Mom said, though her tone suggested she was impressed rather than concerned. You have to spend money to make money, Jake replied, then looked at me with what I recognized as pity. That's probably hard to understand when you're living paycheck to paycheck. Paycheck to paycheck. If only he knew about the business account, with over $150,000 in it, growing every month as new clients signed up and existing ones expanded their services. If only he knew about the enterprise software contract I was implementing, or the 3 new major clients I was negotiating with. I manage okay, I said. I'm sure you do, Jake said, his tone dripping with condescension. But don't you want more? Don't you want to build something meaningful with your life? The question hit harder than he intended. Of course I wanted more. I was building more. I was creating software that helped hundreds of businesses run more efficiently, employing contractors and consultants, developing intellectual property that would generate revenue for years to come. But I couldn't say any of that. Not yet. The timing wasn't right, the pieces weren't in place, and part of me wanted to savor the secret a little longer. I'm working on some things, I said vaguely. Like what? Jake pressed. Just some projects. What kind of projects? I felt the family's attention focus on me, their expressions a mixture of curiosity and skepticism. They were waiting for me to reveal some hobby or side hustle that would confirm their assumptions about my lack of ambition. Computer stuff, I said, immediately hating how dismissive it sounded. Computer stuff? Jake laughed. Like what? Building websites for friends. Something like that. That's nice, Mom said in the tone she used when she was trying to be supportive but didn't really understand. Maybe you can make some extra money doing that? Some extra money, they had no idea. No idea at all. Jake twirled his BMW keys around his finger, the metal catching the light again. Well, when you're ready to get serious about your career, I have some contacts who might be able to help. Entry-level positions, of course, but it would be a start. Thanks, I said. I'll keep that in mind, but I wouldn't. I didn't need Jake's contacts or his entry-level positions. I didn't need his pity or his advice. What I needed was patience and the strength to keep building while they continued to underestimate me. The BMW keys spun in the light, a symbol of success they could understand. But success, I was learning, came in many forms. And sometimes the most satisfying victories were the ones that happened in secret, in the quiet moments when you realized you'd already won, but nobody else knew it yet. The bank statement arrived on a Wednesday morning, and I opened it with the same ritual I'd developed over the past months. I'd make a cup of coffee, sit at my small kitchen table, and carefully examine each line item as if I couldn't quite believe what I was seeing. Mitchell Tech Solutions, LLC, $247,892.34, nearly $250,000. The number seemed impossible, like something that belonged to someone else's life. But there it was, printed in black and white, The accumulation of 18 months of secret work. The hometown diner's contract had been the catalyst, but it wasn't the only source of revenue. Word of mouth had brought me 6 more major clients, including a chain of auto repair shops, a regional medical supply company, and a growing network of independent pharmacies. Each implementation had led to referrals, and each referral had led to larger contracts. I'd also hired my first employee, a freelance developer named Marcus, who helped me handle the increasing workload. Working with him had taught me about delegation, project management, and the complex dynamics of building a team. I was learning to be a leader, even if no one in my family knew it. The irony of maintaining my cafe, JOB, while managing a 6-figure business was becoming almost absurd. That morning, I fielded a call from a potential client in California while refilling napkin dispensers. The previous week, I'd negotiated a contract extension during my lunch break, speaking in hushed tones from the storage room behind the kitchen. "Sarah, table 6 needs more coffee," my manager called out, interrupting my review of the bank statement. I folded the paper and tucked it into my apron pocket, returning to the familiar rhythm of serving customers. But everything felt different now. The coffee pot felt lighter in my hands, the complaints about cold eggs seemed trivial, and the tips I collected throughout the day money I'd once desperately needed now felt like pocket change. The customer at table 6 was reading a business magazine, and I couldn't help but glance at the headlines as I refilled his cup. Tech startup valuations soar and small business software market explodes. I was part of that explosion, contributing to those statistics, but I remained invisible in my stained uniform and comfortable shoes. My phone buzzed with another notification, probably another client email or a question from Marcus about the project timeline. The device felt heavy with secrets, containing a digital life that my family couldn't even imagine. During my break, I checked my messages. Marcus had sent screenshots of the new dashboard interface he built for the pharmacy chain. It was beautiful, clean, intuitive, exactly what the client had requested. Looking at it filled me with the same pride I imagined Jake felt when he closed a big marketing deal, except this was something I built from nothing. "You've been getting a lot of phone calls lately," observed Maria, the other full-time waitress. "Everything okay?" "Just some personal stuff," I said, wondering if she'd noticed the increasing frequency of my business calls. "You should be careful about personal calls during work," she said gently. "Management's been cracking down on that." I nodded, appreciating her concern while internally laughing at the absurdity. Here I was, managing a business that generated more revenue in a month than the cafe made in a quarter, and I was being warned about phone usage. That evening, I made a decision that had been building for weeks. I opened my laptop and began drafting my resignation letter. Not because I was ready to reveal my secret yet, but because the double life was becoming unsustainable. I needed time to focus on my real work, to properly manage my growing client base, and to plan the next phase of my business growth. The letter was simple and professional. "Please accept this as my 2 weeks' notice. My last day of employment will be November 15th. Thank you for the opportunity to work here." I saved it as a draft, not quite ready to send it. There was something appealing about keeping the facade a little longer, about maintaining the fiction, that let my family continue underestimating me. But practically speaking, I couldn't serve coffee and manage enterprise software implementations forever. My phone rang, another client. This one from Texas, interested in discussing a potential partnership that could double my revenue within 6 months. As I took notes on their requirements, I glanced around my tiny apartment and realized how much my life had changed without changing at all. The furniture was the same. The address was the same. Even my daily routine was largely the same. But everything underneath had shifted. I was no longer the family failure working a dead-end job. I was an entrepreneur, a software developer, a business owner with employees and clients, and a growing reputation in my industry. The bank statement in my pocket felt like evidence of a parallel universe, one where I was successful and respected, and financially secure. A universe that existed completely separate from the one where I served coffee to my brother's friends while they mocked my life choices, but the two universes were about to collide. I could feel it building. The inevitable moment when my secret would be revealed and my family would have to reconcile their perception of me with the reality of who I'd become. I finished the call with the Texas client, agreeing to send a proposal by the end of the week. Then I opened my laptop and stared at the resignation letter, my finger hovering over the send button. Not yet, but soon. Very soon, the carefully constructed fiction of my failure would crumble, and everyone would see what I'd been building while they weren't paying attention. The bank statement rustled in my pocket, a $250,000 secret waiting to change everything. The for sale sign appeared overnight, taped hastily to the front window of Corner Café like a desperate prayer. I arrived for my morning shift to find it there. The bold red letters, somehow both shocking and inevitable. "What's this about?" I asked Linda, the owner, as she emerged from the office with red-rimmed eyes and a stack of paperwork. "We're closing," she said simply, her voice flat with exhaustion. "Or trying to sell anyway. Whoever wants to take over this headache." I'd known the cafe was struggling. Customer traffic had declined over the past year, and Linda had been cutting costs wherever possible, cheaper coffee beans. Smaller portions, longer gaps between equipment maintenance, but seeing it spelled out in black and white on a for sale sign made it feel suddenly real. "I'm sorry," I said, and meant it. Despite everything, this place had been my haven for 3 years. It had paid my bills while I built my business, provided cover for my double life, and given me a front row seat to Jake's condescension. 28 years I've been running this place," Linda continued, settling heavily into a booth. "My husband and I opened it when we were your age. Thought we'd retire here, pass it on to our kids. But they're not interested, and frankly, I don't blame them." She gestured around the cafe, the cracked vinyl booths, the outdated equipment, the faded photographs of local high school sports teams. "The building needs work, the equipment's falling apart, and we're barely breaking even. Some months we don't even do that." I poured myself a cup of coffee and sat across from her, my mind already racing with possibilities I shouldn't have been considering. "What are you asking for it?" Linda laughed bitterly. "More than anyone's willing to pay. Apparently, we listed it for $200,000, but that was 6 months ago. Now ... double quote, she shrugged. "I'd take $150 just to be done with it. $150,000. I had more than that sitting in my business account, money I'd been saving for equipment upgrades and office space. The idea that formed in my mind was so audacious, so perfectly poetic, that I almost laughed out loud. "Is that for everything? The building, equipment, inventory?" "Everything except the name," Linda said. "Though honestly, you'd probably want to rebrand anyway. Start fresh. Start fresh." The phrase echoed in my head as I went through the motions of my shift, serving coffee to the usual customers, while my imagination ran wild with possibilities. Corner Café was more than just a struggling business. It was the stage where my family's drama had played out for 3 years. The place where Jake brought his friends to mock me, where I'd serve coffee with a smile while building an empire in secret. Buying it would be more than a business acquisition. It would be a perfect reversal of fortune during my lunch break. I walked around the building with new eyes, evaluating it not as an employee but as a potential owner. The location was actually excellent corner lot with good visibility, parking on 2 sides, walking distance from the business district. The problems were all fixable with enough money and vision. I called my accountant that afternoon, speaking quietly from the storage room behind the kitchen. "I want to explore acquiring a business," I said. "A cafe. Purchase price around $150. "That's a significant investment," he said. "What's your strategy?" "Strategy. I thought about Jake's words from last week's dinner, his lecture about thinking strategically and taking calculated risks. "It's a market opportunity," I said. "The current owner isn't leveraging the location properly. With better management and some capital investment, it could be profitable." All true, but not the whole truth. The real strategy was emotional satisfaction, mixed with practical business sense. I wanted to own the place where I'd been humiliated. I wanted to transform it from a symbol of my supposed failure into evidence of my actual success. "I need to see the financials," my accountant continued. Cash flow statements, tax returns, a breakdown of assets and liabilities. Of course, I'll arrange that. The conversation with Linda was awkward but productive. She was surprised by my interest but desperate enough not to ask too many questions about my financing. We agreed that I could review the books over the weekend, and she'd consider any reasonable offer. The financial records painted a picture of slow decline, revenue dropping steadily over 5 years, costs rising, debt accumulating. But the underlying business model was sound. The cafe had a loyal customer base and a prime location. It just needed fresh management and some strategic investment. I spent Sunday evening running numbers, creating spreadsheets, and developing a business plan. The purchase would drain most of my savings, but the cafe could be profitable within 18 months with the right approach. I could modernize the menu, upgrade the equipment, and create a tech-friendly workspace that would attract remote workers and students. More importantly, I could hire Jake. The idea hit me like lightning. Jake, with his business degree and marketing experience, would be perfect for managing daily operations while I focused on my software business. He'd probably jump at the chance to work for what he'd assume was a new owner who recognized his talents, and then, when the time was right, I'd reveal that his boss was his supposedly unsuccessful sister. I drafted the offer that night. $145,000 cash, with closing in 30 days. Below market value, but Linda was motivated to sell quickly, and cash offers were hard to refuse. The next morning, I handed Linda the offer in an envelope, my hands surprisingly steady. "You're serious about this?" she asked, scanning the document. "Completely. Serious. Can I ask how you're financing it? You're so young, and..." She trailed off, probably wondering how a waitress could afford a 6-figure business acquisition. "I have investors," I said, which was technically true if I counted myself as an investor in my own future. Linda nodded slowly, then extended her hand. "Give me 24 hours to think about it." I shook her hand, trying to contain the excitement building in my chest. In 24 hours, I might own the place where I'd been serving coffee for 3 years. I might own the stage where Jake had performed his monthly humiliation shows. Most importantly, I might own the perfect setting for revealing who I really was. The for sale sign in the window suddenly looked different, not like a symbol of failure, but like an opportunity I'd been waiting for without realizing it. The cafe's financial records were worse than I'd expected, spread across 3 cardboard boxes that Linda had retrieved from her basement. 28 years of receipts, tax returns, supplier invoices, and bank statements, a paper trail of dreams deferred and hopes gradually abandoned. I sat at my kitchen table until 3 in the morning, sorting through the documents and building a comprehensive picture of the business. The cafe had been profitable until 2018, when a combination of rising rent, increased competition from chain coffee shops, and Linda's husband's medical bills had started the downward spiral. The equipment list was particularly revealing. The espresso machine was 12 years old and had been repaired 6 times in the past 2 years. The refrigeration units were energy-inefficient monsters that probably cost more to run than to replace. The point-of-sale system was so outdated, it couldn't integrate with modern payment processors. But buried in the mess were some genuine assets. The building had appreciated significantly over the years and was now worth more than Linda was asking for the entire business. The cafe held grandfathered permits that would be difficult for a new business to obtain. And despite the declining revenue, there was still a core group of loyal customers who came in daily. "You're really doing this?" Marcus asked when I called him the next morning. As my lead developer, he'd become something of a confidant about my business decisions. "I think so. The numbers worked barely, but there's potential. It's just weird, buying the place where you work. Like, what happens when you fire yourself?" I laughed. "I don't think it works that way." "But seriously, why a cafe? It's completely different from software development. You'll be dealing with food service regulations, health inspectors, employee management." "I know," I said, though his questions were valid. Running a cafe would be dramatically different from building software. But something about the challenge appealed to me. Maybe because it was tangible in a way that code WASN single quotes T dot plus. There was the emotional satisfaction factor, which I couldn't explain to Marcus. Without revealing the whole family drama. Linda called that afternoon with her answer. I accept your offer. When can we close? As soon as possible, I said, my heart racing. I'll have my lawyer draft the purchase agreement. The next 2 weeks were a blur of inspections, document reviews, and legal preparations. I hired a commercial real estate attorney, an accountant who specialized in restaurant businesses, and a health inspector to evaluate the kitchen equipment. The due diligence process revealed problems I hadn't anticipated: outdated wiring, plumbing issues, a small but persistent roof leak, but nothing that couldn't be fixed with time and money. The bank loan application was the most nerve-wracking part of the process. Even though I had enough cash to buy the cafe outright, I decided to finance half the purchase to preserve my working capital. Sitting across from the loan officer, trying to explain my qualifications for restaurant ownership while hiding my primary source of income required creative storytelling. Your employment history shows 3 years at the cafe, the loan officer noted, reviewing my application. But your credit report indicates significant income from a business entity. Can you explain that? I do consulting work on the side, I said. Technology consulting, it's been quite successful. Successful enough to qualify for a business loan of this size? I provided carefully edited financial statements that showed my software revenue without revealing the full scope of my business. It was technically honest while being strategically incomplete. This is impressive, the loan officer said, scanning my income documentation. You're making more from consulting than from your day job. Why not focus on that instead of buying a cafe? I like the hospitality industry, I said. The consulting work is great, but it's not particularly social. I enjoy interacting with customers. The loan was approved, contingent on a final property inspection and insurance verification. I spent the weekend before closing walking through the cafe after hours, imagining the changes I wanted to make. The dining area could be reconfigured to create a more modern, comfortable atmosphere. The back office was large enough to serve as a workspace for my software business, allowing me to manage both operations from the same location. The storage room could be converted into a private meeting space for client calls, but the most satisfying change would be in staffing. I'd already decided to offer Jake a management position, assistant manager, maybe with room for advancement based on performance. The irony was delicious. Jake, with his MBA and his condescending attitude, working for his dropout sister without knowing it. The closing took place on a Tuesday morning at the law office downtown. Linda signed over the deed, the liquor license, and the business permits while I transferred $75,000 and signed loan documents for the remainder. In 30 minutes, I went from employee to owner of the place where I'd been serving coffee for 3 years. Congratulations, Linda said, handing me the keys. I hope you have better luck with it than I did. The keys felt heavy in my hand, not just metal, but responsibility, opportunity, and the weight of a secret that was about to become much harder to keep. That afternoon, I stood in the empty cafe, now legally mine, and allowed myself a moment of pure satisfaction. Tomorrow, I would start implementing my plans. I would hire contractors to fix the plumbing and electrical issues. I would order new equipment and redesign the layout. I would craft a job posting for an assistant manager position that would appeal to someone with Jake's background. And in a few weeks, when everything was ready, I would reveal my ownership to my family in the most dramatic way possible. The financial records sat in neat stacks on what was now my desk, telling the story of a business that had struggled and failed under previous management. But they would tell a different story under mine. A story of resurrection, success, and the sweet satisfaction of proving everyone wrong. The ownership transfer documents felt like they weighed 1,000 pounds in my briefcase as I walked into Corner Café for what I knew would be my last shift as an employee. The papers were crisp and official, bearing corporate seals and notarized. Signatures that transformed me from waitress to owner in the eyes of the law. Linda had agreed to stay on for 1 more week to help with the transition, though she didn't know the new owner was currently tying an apron around her waist and checking the coffee supply. The deception felt surreal I was now paying my own wages, technically employing myself to serve coffee in my own establishment. The new owner wants to meet with the staff tomorrow, Linda announced during the morning briefing. Nothing to worry about, just wants to discuss the transition and future plans. Maria nodded nervously. Do you think they'll keep everyone on? I hope so, Linda said, glancing at me. You're all good workers. I can't imagine why they'd want to make changes. I kept my expression neutral, though inside I was already planning exactly which changes I wanted to make. The meeting tomorrow would be my grand reveal, the moment I shed my waitress persona and stepped into my role as the new owner. But first, I needed to set the stage properly. During my lunch break, I called Jake from the storage room, my heart pounding with anticipation. Hey, I heard something interesting, I said, trying to sound casual. The cafe where I work is under new management. They're looking for an assistant manager? Really? Jake's interest was immediate. What kind of place is it? Small cafe, good location, steady customer base. The new owner seemed serious about expanding operations. I thought you might be interested. There was a pause while Jake considered this. I don't know, Sarah. Food service isn't really my area. It's not just food service, I said, reading from the job description I crafted specifically for him. They want someone with business experience to handle operations, marketing, customer relations. Someone who can think strategically about growth opportunities. I deliberately used phrases from his LinkedIn profile and repeated talking points from his recent dinner monologues. The job description was practically a love letter to his ego. What's the pay? Competitive. Plus benefits and performance bonuses. The owner mentioned they want to promote from within as they expand. Jake was definitely interested now. How do you know all this? I still work there, remember? I hear things. Right. Of course. Do you think you could put in a good word? For me? I could mention that my brother has an MBA and management experience, I said, savoring the irony. But you'd have to interview like everyone else. Naturally. When are they interviewing? Next week. I can get you an application. After hanging up, I sat in the storage room for a full minute, amazed by how perfectly the pieces were falling into place. Jake was interested, which meant he would apply, which meant I could hire him, which meant I could eventually reveal that his supposedly unsuccessful sister was actually his boss. The thought sent a thrill of anticipation through me. That was almost intoxicating. That evening, I finalized my plans for the staff meeting. I dressed carefully in clothes that projected authority without being too obvious dark slacks. A blazer, professional but approachable. The ownership documents were organized in a leather portfolio that I bought specifically for the occasion. I arrived at the cafe 30 minutes early, using my new keys to let myself in. The building felt different now that it was mine, not smaller, exactly, but more intimate. Every detail seemed sharper, more significant. The crack in the front window that needed repair. The loose floor tile by the register. The faded paint on the walls, all of it belonged to me now. All of it was my responsibility to fix, improve. And transform. Linda arrived at exactly 9 o'clock, followed by Maria and the 2 part-time employees. They gathered in the dining area, looking nervous and expectant. The new owner should be here any minute, Linda said, checking her watch. Actually, I said, standing up and opening my portfolio, the new owner is already here. The silence that followed was profound. Maria's mouth fell open. Linda blinked several times, as if trying to process information that didn't make sense. Sarah? Maria said finally. What are you talking about? I bought the cafe, I said, removing the ownership. Documents and setting them on the table. As of yesterday, I'm the new owner of Corner Café. But you're... Linda started, then stopped, confusion written across her face. How is that possible? I have other sources of income, I said simply. I've been running a software development business for the past 2 years. It's been quite successful. You're a software developer? Maria asked, still trying to process this information. Among other things, I design inventory management systems for small businesses. The cafe will actually be a good complement to my existing operations. Linda sat down heavily, shaking her head. You were working here, serving coffee while you owned a software company? I was building a software company, I corrected. It started small, but it's grown significantly. Buying the cafe is my next expansion project. This is incredible, Maria said, a smile breaking across her face. You've been our coworker this whole time, and you're actually a successful businesswoman. I hope to be, I said. I'm certainly going to try. We spent the next hour discussing my plans for the cafe. I assured everyone that their jobs were secure and outlined my vision for modernizing operations while maintaining the community atmosphere that made the place special. But even as I talked about new equipment and expanded hours, part of my mind was focused on next week's interviews. Jake would walk into this cafe expecting to impress some anonymous new owner, never imagining that the person across the desk would be a supposedly unsuccessful sister. The ownership documents sat on the table between us, tangible proof that everything my family thought they knew about me was wrong. Tomorrow I would start the process of showing them just how wrong they'd been. The anticipation was almost overwhelming. The business cards arrived on Monday morning, delivered in a crisp white box that felt like it contained explosives. Sarah Mitchell, owner and CEO, Corner Café, was printed in elegant typeface on heavy cardstock, each card a small declaration of independence from my family's expectations. I'd scheduled Jake's interview for Thursday at 2 p.m., deliberately choosing a time when the cafe would be busy enough to provide an audience, but not so busy that we'd be interrupted. I wanted witnesses to this moment, people who could later confirm that what happened was real. The intervening days passed slowly. I threw myself into renovation planning, meeting with contractors and equipment suppliers, but my mind kept drifting to Thursday afternoon. I rehearsed the scene dozens of times, imagining Jake's expression when he realized who he was talking to. Wednesday night, I barely slept. I kept checking my phone, half expecting Jake to cancel or postpone. But Thursday morning arrived with no changes to the plan. At 1:30 p.m., I positioned myself at the corner table where I conducted my other interviews. My leather portfolio open and my new business cards stacked neatly beside it. Jake arrived precisely on time, dressed in his best suit and carrying the same leather briefcase he'd brought to family dinners. He looked confident, polished, every inch the successful businessman he believed himself to be. He walked past me without recognition, scanning the cafe for someone who looked like an owner. I watched him approach the counter where Maria was, working the register. "Excuse me," he said. "I have an interview scheduled with the owner at 2 o'clock, Jake Mitchell." "Oh, that's right here," Maria said, pointing to my table with barely suppressed glee. She'd been looking forward to this moment almost as much as I had. Jake turned toward my table, and I watched his face cycle through confusion, recognition, and then complete bewilderment. He stood frozen for several seconds, his briefcase hanging from his hand like dead weight. "Hello, Jake," I said, gesturing to the chair across from me. "Please, have a seat." "Sarah?" His voice came out as a croak. "What are you doing here?" "I'm conducting your interview," I said, sliding one of my business cards across the table. "For the assistant manager position." He picked up the card and stared at it as if it were written in a foreign language. "Owner and CEO? Sarah, what is this?" "This is my business," I said simply. "I bought the cafe last week. I'm the new owner you've been hearing about." Jake sank into the chair, still clutching my business card. "That's impossible." "You work here, you're a waitress." "I was a waitress," I corrected. "I also happen to be a software developer in business." "Owner, the waitressing was just temporary." "Temporary?" Jake's voice was rising, drawing attention from other customers. "You've been here for 3 years." "I've been building my software company for 3 years," I said. The cafe job provided steady income while I grew my real business, which, by the way, generated over $200,000 in revenue last year. The number hit him like a physical blow. Jake's face went pale and he set down my business card as if it had burned him. $200,000, he repeated slowly. "Give or take, it's been a good year." But you said you were happy serving coffee. You said you didn't want to go back to school or get a real job. I already had a real job, I said. I was just keeping it quiet until the time was right. Jake looked around the cafe as if seeing it for the first time. You own this place. I do. And I'm looking for an assistant manager. Someone with business experience who can help me expand operations. According to your resume, you have an MBA and 3 years of management experience. That sounds like exactly what I need. You want to hire me? Jake asked, his voice barely above a whisper. If you're qualified. This would be a working interview, of course. You'd start as assistant manager, but there's potential for advancement as we grow. I'm planning to open a second location within 18 months. Jake stared at me as if I'd sprouted a second head. You're planning to expand? That's what successful businesses do, I said, borrowing his own words from previous family dinners. You have to think strategically, set goals, take calculated risks. The irony wasn't lost. On him? I could see him remembering all the times he'd lectured me about business strategy, all the condescending advice he'd given about my lack of ambition. Sarah, he said finally, I don't understand. How is this possible? How did you afford to buy this place? The same way you afforded your BMW, I said. I worked hard, saved money, and made strategic investments. The difference is that I was building equity in a business rather than depreciating assets. Jake winced at the reference to his car. But where did the startup money come from? How did you learn software development? I taught myself. Online courses, YouTube tutorials, practice projects. It took time, but I figured it out. Turns out I have a natural aptitude for it. This is insane, Jake said, shaking his head. All this time you've been running a business? Making more money than I am, and you never said anything? Would you? Had believed me if I had. The question hung in the air between us. We both knew the answer. Jake would have dismissed my claims, just as the family had dismissed my vague references to computer projects. They'd been so invested in the narrative. Of my failure that success would have seemed impossible. So, I said, consulting the interview questions I'd prepared, tell me about your management philosophy. How do you motivate employees and drive performance improvements? Jake opened his mouth, then closed it again. The absurdity of the situation seemed to hit him all at once. He was interviewing with his little sister for a job at the cafe, where she'd been serving him coffee for 3 years. This is really happening, he said, more to himself than to me. It really is, I confirmed. The question is whether you want the job. It pays $45,000 plus benefits, with performance bonuses based on revenue growth. Not as much as you're making now, I'm sure, but there's significant upside potential. Jake looked down at his hands, then back at me. Does the family know? Not yet. I was planning to tell them after I got settled in my new role as owner. But if you take the job, I suppose they'll find out sooner. If I take the job, I'll be working for my little sister. That's right, I said. Is that a problem? The question forced him to confront everything he thought he knew about our relative positions in life. For 3 years, he'd been the successful one, the golden child with the business degree and the corner office. Now he was sitting across from me, considering whether to accept a job offer from the sister he'd been mocking. I need to think about this, he said finally. Of course. Take your time. I'll need an answer by Monday if you're interested. Jake stood up slowly, still holding my business card. Sarah, I owe you an apology. All those times I brought my friends. Here, all the things I said about your life. We can discuss that later, I said. Right now, I'm just focused on running a business. If you want to be part of that, great. If not, I understand. He nodded and walked toward the door, moving like someone in a dream. At the threshold, he turned back. $200,000? Last year's revenue, I confirmed. This year's looking even better. Jake walked out into the afternoon sunshine, leaving me alone with my business cards and the satisfaction of a plan perfectly executed. Around the cafe, other customers were pretending not to stare, clearly fascinated by the drama they'd just witnessed. I gathered my materials and returned to the office, my heart still racing from the encounter. In 5 minutes, I demolished 3 years of family mythology and offered my brother a chance to see me as I really was. Now I just had to wait and see if he'd take it. The termination letter was simple and direct, printed on Corner Café letterhead that still felt surreal to see with my name at the bottom. Dear Jake, after careful consideration, we have decided not to move forward with your employment. Thank you for your interest in our organization. I had written it Sunday night after Jake called to accept the position, then spent 3 weeks watching him work with a mixture of admiration and growing frustration. He was competent, professional, and genuinely helpful with the cafe's operations. He was also completely unchanged in his fundamental attitude toward me. Even after learning that I owned the business, Jake seemed incapable of treating me as his boss. He questioned my decisions, offered unsolicited advice, and consistently acted as if he were doing me a favor by working there. The final straw came when he invited his colleagues from Pinnacle Marketing to the cafe for what he called a business development meeting. I think we could really help with your marketing strategy, he told them, speaking about my business as if it were a charity case that needed rescuing. Sarah's got good instincts, but she doesn't have formal business training. That conversation happened on a Tuesday. By Friday, I'd made my decision. Jake arrived for his regular shift at 10 o'clock, greeting Maria and the other employees with his usual confidence. He'd settled into the role more quickly than I'd expected, developing relationships with regular customers and implementing several operational improvements that I had to admit were genuinely helpful. But helpfulness wasn't enough to compensate for disrespect. Jake, could I see you in the office? I said, holding the termination letter behind my back. Sure thing, boss, he said, the title carrying just enough sarcasm to remind me why this was necessary. We walked into the small office behind the kitchen, and had closed the door behind us. Jake settled into the chair across from my desk, looking relaxed and confident. What's up? If this is about the marketing presentation, I think Tom and Steve were really impressed. They might be able to help us develop a proper brand strategy. Actually, I said, placing the letter on the desk between us, this is about your employment here. Jake's expression shifted as he read the header. What is this? Your termination letter. Today is your last day. The words hung in the air like smoke from an explosion. Jake read the letter twice, his face cycling through confusion, disbelief, and then anger. You're firing me. I am. Why? I've been doing good work here. The customers like me, the staff likes me. I've helped improve operations. You have, I agreed. But you've also consistently failed to respect my authority as owner and CEO of this business. What are you talking about? I've been nothing but supportive. Jake, 3 days ago, you told your marketing friends that I have good instincts but lack formal business training. Yesterday, you suggested that I needed to hire a real consultant to help with strategic planning. Last week, you questioned my decision to upgrade the espresso machine in front of a customer. Jake opened his mouth to argue, then closed it again. The examples were specific and undeniable. I wasn't questioning your authority, he said finally. I was trying to help. By undermining my credibility? By suggesting that my success is somehow accidental? That's not what I meant, but it's what you said, and it's what you believe. I leaned forward, meeting his eyes. Jake, I built a 6-figure software business while working minimum wage jobs. I saved enough money to buy this cafe outright. I've increased revenue here by 30% in 3 weeks. What exactly do you think I need help with? The question forced him to confront the contradiction between his perception and reality. For 31 years, he'd been the successful sibling, the one with the education and the corner office and the BMW. Accepting that, it might actually be more successful than him required abandoning a fundamental part of his identity. This is about what happened before, isn't it? He said. About the way I treated you when you were working here. Partly. But mostly it's about the way you're treating me now. Sarah, I'm sorry about those things I said. I know I was wrong. Are you? Because you're still doing it. You're still talking to me like I'm the family failure who got lucky. You're still acting like you're doing me a favor by working here. Jake stood up and began pacing the small office. This is insane. You can't fire me for having opinions about business strategy. I can fire you for anything I want, I said calmly. This is my business. These are my decisions to make. And I've decided that your attitude isn't compatible with our culture. Our culture? Jake's voice was rising. I helped create this culture. I've been working my ass off to make this place successful. You've been working to make yourself look successful, I corrected. There is a difference. The accusation hit home. Jake stopped pacing and stared at me, recognition dawning in his eyes. You planned this, he said slowly. You hired me just so you could fire me. I hired you because I thought you might be able to see me differently if our roles were reversed. I fired you because you proved that you can't. This is revenge. This is business, I said, standing up and opening the office door. Your personal items are in a box by the register. Maria has your final paycheck. Jake walked toward the door, then stopped and turned back. Does the family know about this? They will. They're going to think you're crazy. Firing your own brother over some perceived slight. Maybe they'll realize that I've been succeeding while they thought I was failing. And that success changes the rules of how people get to treat me. Jake shook his head and walked out of the office. I followed him into the main dining area, where his box of personal items waited by the register. Several customers were watching the interaction with obvious interest, though they were pretending to read newspapers or check their phones. This isn't over, Jake said, picking up his box. Double quotes, yes, it is, I replied. At least the part where you get to dismiss my accomplishments and question my judgment. That part is definitely over. Jake looked around the cafe one more time, taking in the improvements I'd made, the customers enjoying their coffee, the staff who were clearly on my side in this confrontation. I never thought you had it in you, he said finally. I know. I said. That was the problem. He walked out without another word, the bell above the door chiming his exit. The cafe fell silent for a moment, then gradually returned to its normal rhythm of conversation and coffee grinding. I returned to the office and sat at my desk, the termination letter now filed in Jake's personnel folder. My hands were shaking, slightly not from fear or regret, but from the adrenaline of finally standing up for myself. The letter was more than just a termination notice. It was a declaration that the old rules no longer applied, that I would no longer accept being treated as lesser than by people who had accomplished less. It was the sound of the family dynamic finally, irrevocably shifting in my favor. The voicemail from Mom arrived at 6:47 p.m., her voice tight with the kind of controlled anger I hadn't heard since I was a teenager caught breaking curfew. Sarah Elizabeth Mitchell, you call me back immediately. I don't know what kind of game you think you're playing, but firing your brother is completely unacceptable. Jake is devastated. Your father is furious, and I'm frankly ashamed of your behavior. This family does not treat each other this way. Call me back. I saved the message, knowing I'd want to listen to it again later. The formality of using my full name, the assumption that I owed her an explanation, the complete lack of curiosity about why I might have fired Jake. It was a perfect encapsulation of 34 years of family dynamics. The second call came 20 minutes later. This time from Dad. Sarah, I'm not sure what's gotten into you, but this situation with your brother needs to be resolved immediately. Jake says you bought some cafe and then fired him for no reason. That doesn't sound like the daughter I raised. We need to sit down and talk about this as a family. Then came a text from Jake. Hope you're happy. You've upset Mom and made Dad question everything about how you were raised. All because you wanted to play business owner for a few weeks. The messages continued throughout the evening calls. From my aunt, texts from family friends, even a Facebook message from my cousin in Oregon who somehow already knew about the situation. The family network had activated, and the consensus was clear. I had lost my mind and needed to be brought back to reality. None of them asked about my software business. None of them questioned how I'd afforded to buy the cafe. None of them seemed curious about what Jake might have done to warrant termination. The narrative had already been established. Successful brother unfairly attacked by unstable sister having some kind of breakdown. The irony was exquisite. For 3 years, I'd been invisible to them, serving coffee while they discussed my lack of direction. Now that I'd become impossible to ignore, they were united in trying to minimize my actions and restore the previous order. I turned off my phone and spent the evening reviewing my business metrics. The software company had closed 2 new contracts in the past week, bringing monthly recurring revenue to over $15,000. The K was exceeding projected sales by 12%, and customer satisfaction scores had improved significantly since. I'd taken over DOP by any objective measure. I was succeeding beyond anything Jake had accomplished. But success, I was learning, didn't automatically translate to respect from people who were invested in your failure. The emergency family meeting was scheduled for Sunday dinner. Mandatory attendance implied, though not explicitly stated. I arrived at Mom's house to find Jake's BMW already in the driveway, along with Dad's truck and my aunt's sedan. Clearly, this intervention required witnesses. "Sarah," Mom said as I walked into the living room, her tone suggesting I was a child who'd been called to account for breaking something valuable. "Sit down, we need to talk." The family was arranged like a tribunal, Mom and Dad on the couch, Jake in the armchair, my aunt perched on the ottoman like a court reporter. I took the remaining chair, feeling like a defendant at my own trial. "Now," Dad began, "Jake has told us his version of what happened. We'd like to hear yours." "I fired an employee who wasn't meeting performance standards," I said simply. "He's not just an employee," Mom interjected. "He's your brother. At the cafe, he was my employee, and he consistently undermined my authority and questioned my decisions. Because he was trying to help," Jake said, leaning forward in his chair. "I was trying to share my business knowledge with someone who clearly needed guidance." "Guidance?" I turned to face him directly. "Jake, I own a software company that generates 6 figures annually. I bought a struggling cafe and increased its revenue by 30% in 3 weeks. What exactly do you think I need guidance about?" "See?" Jake appealed to the room. "This is what I'm talking about. She's developed this fantasy where she's some kind of business mogul. She bought a failing cafe with money from God knows where and now thinks she's Warren Buffett. Money from God knows where." I pulled out my phone and opened my banking app. Here's where the money came from. I showed them the business account balance, $189,442.73. The number had the same effect as a flashbang grenade. The room fell completely silent. "That's your account?" Dad asked finally. "That's my business account. For Mitchell Tech Solutions, the software company I've been running for 2 years. 2 years? Mom's voice was barely a whisper. I started it while working at the cafe. Built it up gradually, client by client. Last year, we generated $247,000 in revenue." Jake stared at the phone screen as if it were displaying alien hieroglyphics. "That's impossible. It's very possible. I can show you the tax returns if you'd like." "But you're a waitress," my aunt said, confusion written across her face. "I was a waitress. I am also a software developer, business owner, and now cafe proprietor. Turns out people can be more than one thing." The silence stretched on as they processed information that didn't fit their established narrative. I could see them struggling to reconcile the bank balance with their image of me as the family disappointment. "Why didn't you tell us?" Mom asked. "When?" "During the dinners where Jake brought his friends to mock my career choice? Or maybe during the conversations where you suggested I go back to school because college isn't for everyone?" "We were trying to help," Dad said. "You were trying to manage your disappointment in me. There's a difference." "That's not fair," Jake said. "We care about you. We want you to succeed." "You want me to succeed according to your definition of success," I said. "Get a degree, work for someone else, follow the path that Jake followed. You never considered that I might find my own way." "Because you never told us you were finding your own way," Jake protested. "You just kept serving coffee and acting like everything was fine." "I kept serving coffee because it paid the bills while I built something bigger. And I acted like everything was fine because every time I tried to talk about my projects, you dismissed them as hobbies. Computer stuff isn't exactly specific. Mom said defensively, you never asked for specifics. You just assumed it wasn't important. The conversation continued for another hour, circling around the same fundamental issue. They'd created a story about who I was and what I was capable of, and my actual success threatened that story. Admitting I'd been succeeding all along meant admitting they'd been wrong about me for years. So what happens now? Dad asked finally. Now I continue running my businesses. Jake finds another job. And hopefully we all learn something about making assumptions. You can't just destroy family relationships because of some business disagreement, my aunt said. I didn't destroy anything, I replied. I just stopped pretending that disrespect is acceptable because it came from family. Jake stood up abruptly. This is ridiculous. I don't have to sit here and be lectured by someone who thinks buying a cafe makes them a business expert. You're... Right, I said. You don't have to sit here. Just like I don't have to employ someone who can't respect my authority. Fine, Jake said, grabbing his keys. But don't expect me to pretend this is normal. Don't expect me to act like my little sister firing me is just business. I don't expect anything from you, I said. That's probably the healthiest approach for both of us. Jake left, and the rest of the family sat in uncomfortable silence. Finally, Mom spoke. Sarah, we love you. We want what's best for you. But this, she gestured vaguely, this isn't how families handle conflict. Maybe not, I said, standing up. But it's how business owners handle employees who don't perform. And it's how adults handle people who don't treat them with respect. I walked to the door, then turned back one more time. For what it's worth, I love you all too. But love doesn't mean accepting treatment that undermines my success or my confidence. Jake can apologize when he's ready to see me as I actually am, not as who he thinks I should be. I drove home through the quiet Sunday evening streets, my phone buzzing with more family messages I didn't read. The angry voicemail from Mom sat in my saved messages, a reminder of how quickly support could turn to criticism when you stopped playing the role people expected. But I also had messages from clients, from Marcus about a new project milestone, from Maria thanking me for the raise I'd given her after increasing cafe efficiency. Those messages represented relationships built on mutual respect and shared goals rather than family obligation and old assumptions. The fallout would continue for a while, hurt feelings. Awkward family gatherings, relatives taking sides in a conflict they didn't fully understand. But the foundation had shifted permanently. I was no longer the family member who could be dismissed, minimized, or condescended to. I was the one with the business account balance and the track record of success. And that changed everything, whether they wanted to acknowledge it or not. The diary entries were painful to read, even though I'd written them myself. I found the old journal while cleaning out my childhood bedroom, preparing to move into the apartment above the cafe. The pages chronicled years of feeling invisible, dismissed, and fundamentally not enough. Jake got into State University today. Mom cried with happiness. When I asked about community college, she said we'd see how things go financially. I know what that means. Family dinner tonight. Jake talked about his internship for 20 minutes. When I mentioned my website project, Dad changed the subject to the weather. Jake's graduation is next month. Mom's already planning a party. She keeps talking about how proud we are of our college graduate, like I'm not sitting right there. Page after page of small rejections, casual dismissals, and the gradual erosion of my sense of worth within the family structure. Reading them, now with the perspective of success and distance, I could see patterns I missed at the time. The emotional neglect hadn't been malicious. It had been systemic. Jake was the son, the one with obvious potential, the one who followed conventional paths to success. I was the daughter, the creative one, the one who would probably figure things out eventually, but didn't need the same level of investment. My phone buzzed with a text from Jake. Can we talk? I've been thinking about what happened. I stared at the message for several minutes before responding. What did you want to discuss? Everything. I think I owe you more than an apology. We agreed to meet at a neutral location, a coffee shop downtown, not my cafe. Jake arrived looking uncharacteristically rumpled, his usual polish replaced by something that seemed more genuine. Thank you for meeting me, he said, sliding into the booth across from me. You said you wanted to talk. I wanted to apologize. Really apologize, not just say sorry because Mom told me to. I waited, curious to see where this would lead. I've been thinking about what you said, about the way I treated you. And I realized something. I never really saw you as an adult. The admission hung between us, more honest than anything he'd said to me in years. Even after I moved out, got my own place, started working in my mind, you were still the little sister who dropped out of college. I never updated that picture. And when I told you about my business, I thought it was phase. Like when you went through your photography stage in high school, or when you wanted to be a veterinarian. I figured you'd try this computer thing for a while and then move on to something more realistic. More conventional, you mean? Yeah, more like what I would do. Jake ran his hands through his hair, a gesture I remembered from childhood when he was frustrated or confused. Sarah, I looked up your company after you fired me. I read the testimonials on your website, looked at your client list. That's not a hobby or a phase. That's a real business solving real problems for real people. I know. You've been building something meaningful while I've been, what? Managing marketing campaigns for widget companies? Buying cars to impress people I don't even like? Self-reflection surprised me. This wasn't the Jake I'd grown up with, the one who'd never questioned his own path or priorities. Your work matters too, I said, meaning it. You help businesses reach their customers. That's valuable. But it's not mine, you know? I'm not building anything. I'm just executing other people's strategies, climbing someone else's ladder. We sat in silence for a moment, both processing the conversation. I want to ask you something, Jake said finally. And I want you to be honest. Did you hire me just to fire me? Was the whole thing some elaborate revenge plan? I considered the question. Carefully, partly. I wanted you to see me differently. And I thought putting you in a position where I was your boss might force that perspective shift. And when it didn't work, I realized that changing other people isn't my responsibility. Managing my own boundaries is. So you fired me. I fired an employee who wasn't performing. The fact that he was my brother made it harder, not easier. Jake nodded slowly. That's fair. I was a terrible employee. You were a competent employee with a bad attitude? There's a difference. Still not acceptable in your business. Still not acceptable in any business I run. We talked for another hour, covering ground we'd never explored before. Jake admitted that my success had forced him to question his own choices, his own definition of achievement. I acknowledged that keeping my business secret had been partly about protecting myself from exactly the kind of dismissal he'd initially shown. What happens now? He asked as we prepared to leave. Now you figure out what you actually want to do with your career, instead of just following the path that was expected of you. And us? As siblings? That depends on whether you can see me. As an equal? As someone whose judgment and capabilities you respect. I'm working on it, he said. It's harder than it should be, but I'm working on it. That's all I can ask for. As I drove back to the cafe, I thought about the diary entries, the years of feeling unseen and undervalued. The girl who'd written those pages had been building something even than resilience, determination, the quiet strength that had carried her through years of dismissal. That girl had grown into someone who could buy a business, fire her own brother, and sit across from him later to discuss it as equals. The transformation hadn't happened overnight, but it had been inevitable from the moment I decided I was worth more than other people's limited expectations. The diary was a record of pain, but also of persistence. I kept going even when no one believed in me. I kept building even when no one was watching. And now, finally, the work was starting to speak for itself. Some revelations come suddenly, in moments of dramatic confrontation. Others unfold gradually. and quiet conversations over coffee and honest admissions of past mistakes. Both kinds were necessary, I was learning, for families to find their way back to each other. The family therapy session notes sat on Dr. Henderson's desk like evidence in a trial. She'd suggested family counseling after Mom called her, concerned about the conflict between Jake and me. What started as an attempt to fix my supposed overreaction had evolved into something much deeper. I'd like each of you to describe how you see Sarah's role in the family, Dr. Henderson said, her pen poised over a legal pad. We were all there, Mom, Dad, Jake, and me, arranged in a circle like awkward teenagers at summer camp. The office smelled of lavender and disappointment. Sarah has always been our creative child, Mom began, her voice taking on the tone she used when talking to strangers about her children. She's artistic, free-spirited. We've always supported her exploration of different interests. How do you support that exploration? Dr. Henderson asked. We encourage her to try new things. We don't pressure her to conform to conventional expectations. And how do you respond when those explorations become successful? Mom paused, clearly not expecting the question. Well, we're happy for any success she achieves. Were you happy when you learned about her software business? Another pause. We were surprised. She hadn't told us about it. Why do you think she didn't tell you? I don't know. Maybe she thought we wouldn't understand. Dr. Henderson turned to Dad. How do you see Sarah's role in the family? Sarah's always been independent, Dad said. Sometimes too independent. She makes decisions without consulting the family, like dropping out of college or buying this cafe business. When Sarah dropped out of college, what was the family's financial situation? We were struggling. My medical bills were significant. And who helped with those bills? Dad shifted uncomfortably. Sarah contributed. She took on extra work. So her decision to leave school helped the family financially? Yes, but she could have found other ways to help. She didn't have to sacrifice her education. What other ways were available? Dad fell, silent, realizing the trap he'd walked into. There hadn't been other ways. Jake was already in school, the bills were mounting, and someone had to work full-time to keep the family afloat. Jake, Dr. Henderson continued, how do you see Sarah's role in the family? Sarah's the one who ... Jake stopped, seeming to search for the right words. She's always been in the background, supporting everyone else, making sacrifices. I guess I never really thought about what she wanted for herself. When did you become aware of her business success? When she interviewed me for a job? I had no idea she'd built something that significant. How did that make you feel? Confused. Embarrassed. Like I'd been blind to something obvious. And how did you respond to those feelings? Jake looked down at his hands. I tried to minimize it. I told myself it was luck or timing or something. I couldn't accept that my little sister had actually outperformed me. The honesty in the room was becoming uncomfortable. Dr. Henderson made notes, then turned to me. Sarah, how do you see your role in the family? I was the one who kept quiet about my successes to avoid threatening the established order. I was the one who absorbed criticism and dismissal because it was easier than fighting for recognition. And how did that affect you? It taught me that my achievements only mattered if other people validated them. It taught me to make myself smaller so other people could feel bigger. Is that sustainable? No, it's not. Dr. Henderson sat down, her pen, and looked around the circle. I'm hearing a family system where Sarah has been assigned the role of the supportive, sacrificing member while Jake has been positioned as the achiever. Sarah's actual achievements threaten the system because they suggest the roles might be inaccurate. That's not fair, Mom protested. We love both our children equally. Love and support aren't the same thing, Dr. Henderson replied. You can love someone while consistently undervaluing their contributions. We never undervalued Sarah's contributions, Dad said. When Sarah was working full-time to help with medical bills, did the family acknowledge that sacrifice at Jake's graduation party? Silence. When Sarah mentioned her computer projects, did anyone ask for details or express genuine interest? More. Silence. When Jake brought friends to mock Sarah's work at the cafe, did anyone intervene or express concern? The silence stretched until it became painful. I think, Dr. Henderson said gently, that this family has operated on some assumptions that no longer serve anyone well. Sarah has outgrown the role she was assigned, and the family's resistance to acknowledging that growth has created the current conflict. So what do we do? Mom asked, her voice small. You learn to see each other as you actually are, not as you think you should be. You acknowledge past mistakes and work to create new patterns of interaction. And if we can't, Jake asked, then Sarah will continue building relationships based on mutual respect while maintaining distance from family members who can't offer that respect. The session ended with an assignment. Each family member was supposed to write down 3 specific ways they would change their behavior toward the others. Mom looked exhausted, Dad seemed thoughtful, and Jake appeared genuinely committed to. Doing the work. As we walked to our cars, Mom caught my arm. Sarah, I want you to know that I'm proud of what you've built. I should have said that weeks ago. Thank you, I said. That means a lot. I also want to apologize for not asking more questions when you were trying to tell us about your projects. We made assumptions about what was important and what wasn't. We all made assumptions, I said. The difference is that I stopped expecting you to change and started changing myself instead. Is it too late for us to change too? I looked at my mother, really looked at her, and saw someone who was genuinely trying to understand how things had gone so wrong. It's not too late, I said. But it's going to require seeing me differently than you have for 34 years. Are you ready for that? I'm ready to try, she said, as I drove home. I realized that the family therapy session had accomplished something I hadn't expected. It had forced everyone to articulate patterns that had been operating in silence for decades. Making the invisible visible was the first step toward changing it. The notes from that session would become a reference point for future conversations, a record of the moment when we all acknowledged that the old system wasn't working and committed to building something healthier. Whether that commitment would last remained to be seen. But for the first time in years, I felt hopeful that my family might actually be capable of growth. The business plan for my second cafe location covered 43 pages and represented 6 months of careful market research, financial projections, and strategic planning. Unlike my first business ventures, this expansion wasn't driven by secrecy or revenge. It was pure entrepreneurial ambition. The natural evolution of proven success. I'd found the perfect location in the next town over, a former bookstore with exposed brick walls and large windows that would create exactly the atmosphere I wanted. The lease negotiations were complex, the renovation budget substantial, but I had both the capital and the expertise to make it work. The numbers look solid, my accountant said, reviewing the projections. Conservative revenue estimates, reasonable. Expense assumptions. You've learned a lot about business planning in the past year. Learning was an understatement. I've been forced to master everything from health department regulations to commercial lease law, from employee management to supply chain logistics. The knowledge had come through necessity, trial and error, and countless hours of research. But the most important lesson had been about boundaries, professional boundaries with employees, financial boundaries with family, and emotional boundaries with people who couldn't accept my success. Jake knocked on my office door. As I was reviewing contractor bids for the new location, we'd been slowly rebuilding our relationship over the past 3 months, but it was still tentative, marked by careful conversations and deliberate respect. Got a minute? He asked. Sure, what's up? He settled into the chair across from my desk, looking more relaxed than I'd seen him in years. I wanted to update you on the job search. After leaving the cafe, Jake had taken time to reassess his career goals. Instead of immediately jumping into another marketing position, he'd been exploring options that might offer more personal fulfillment. I got an offer, he said. Regional sales manager for a software company that serves small businesses. It's a pay cut from my last job, but the work seems more meaningful. That sounds like a good fit, I said, meaning it. You'd be helping businesses solve real problems instead of just pushing products. That's what I thought. Plus, working in the software industry might help me understand what you do better. The comment would have sounded patronizing 6 months ago. Now it seemed like genuine interest in my world. Are you going to take it? I think so. I wanted to ask your advice first, though. The request surprised me. Jake asking for my professional opinion represented a fundamental shift in how he saw me. What specifically do you want to know? Whether you think I'm making the right choice? Whether I'm running away from challenges or running towards something better? I considered the question seriously. What does your gut tell you? That I've been chasing other people's definitions of success for so long that I'm not sure what mine looks like anymore. Then maybe this job is a chance to figure that out. You think so? I think any job that makes you excited about Monday morning is worth exploring. Jake smiled, the first genuinely happy expression I'd seen from him since the firing. Thanks. Your opinion matters to me. Why? Because you've actually built something meaningful. You took risks, made sacrifices, created value for people. That's the kind of success I want to understand. We talked for another 20 minutes about his new opportunity, and I found myself genuinely enjoying the conversation. This was what I'd hoped for when I'd hired him originally, a relationship based on mutual respect rather than childhood roles. After Jake left, I returned to the expansion plans, but my mind kept drifting to the changes in our family dynamics. The therapy sessions had been awkward but productive, forcing conversations we'd avoided for years. Mom had started asking detailed questions about my business, showing genuine interest in my work. Dad had begun treating my opinions on financial matters with the same respect he showed Jake's. The shift hadn't been dramatic or instant. It was more like a gradual recalibration, with each family interaction slightly more balanced than the last. My phone buzzed with a text from Mom. Saw the article about your expansion in the business journal. So proud of you. The article had run that morning a 2-page feature about local entrepreneurs who were driving economic growth. The reporter had interviewed me for an hour, asking detailed questions about my software business, the cafe acquisition, and my plans for further expansion. Seeing my name in print, described as a rising star in the local business community, felt surreal. For so many years, I'd been invisible to everyone, including my own family. Now I was being held up as an example of entrepreneurial success. But the real satisfaction came from the relationships I was building on my own terms, employees who respected my leadership, clients who valued my expertise, a family that was slowly learning to see me as I actually was. The boundaries I'd established weren't walls, they were foundations. They created space for authentic relationships, while protecting me from the dismissal and diminishment that had defined my earlier life. Maria knocked on my office door, interrupting my thoughts. Sarah? The contractor's here for the final walkthrough of the new location. I gathered my notes and headed out, ready to take the next step in an expansion that represented everything I'd learned about building success on my own terms. The second cafe would be bigger, better designed, and more profitable than the first. But more importantly, it would be built without secrecy, without revenge, and without the need to prove anything to anyone except myself. The business plan tucked under my arm represented more than financial projections. It was evidence of how much I'd grown, how much I'd learned, and how far I'd come from the girl who once thought she needed permission to succeed. Didn't need permission anymore. I just needed determination, and I had plenty of that. The family photo was Mom's idea, taken at the grand opening of my second cafe location. Unlike the graduation photo that had dominated her mantelpiece for years, this one showed all of us as equal successful adults who had found their own paths and learned to respect each other's journeys. Jake stood next to me, wearing the name tag that identified him as my regional sales manager. After 6 months with the software company, he'd approached me about joining my team, and I'd hired him based purely on his qualifications and attitude. The brother who had once mocked my minimum wage job was now working to help me expand my business empire. I never imagined this, Mom said, looking around the bustling cafe with wonder. 2 years ago, I thought you were wasting your potential serving coffee. Now you own 2 cafes and employ 15 people. Plus the software business, Dad added, still amazed by the scope of what I built. How many clients do you have now? 47 active accounts, I said. We're on track to hit $500,000 in annual revenue next year. The numbers no longer felt surreal. They were simply facts, measurable results of consistent effort and strategic decision-making. But what felt most satisfying wasn't the financial success, it was the respect in my father's voice when he asked about my business metrics. Sarah, my aunt said, approaching with a plate of the artisanal pastries we'd started featuring, I owe you an apology. I was wrong about the situation with Jake. I didn't understand what was really happening. It's okay, I said. It was complicated. No, it wasn't complicated. I just assumed Jake was the victim because he's always been the successful one. I never considered that maybe he wasn't behaving appropriately. The conversation was interrupted by a local reporter who wanted to interview me about the expansion. As I answered questions about my business philosophy and growth strategy, I caught Jake watching from across the room. When our eyes met, he smiled and gave me a thumbs dash up. Later that evening, after the last customer had left and the staff had finished cleaning, Jake and I sat in the empty cafe reviewing the day's numbers. We exceeded projections by 18%, he reported. And the customer feedback forms are overwhelmingly positive. Good work, I said. You've been instrumental in making this expansion successful. Thanks for giving me the chance, Jake said. I know it was risky, hiring family after everything that happened. It was risky hiring someone who had previously failed to respect my authority, I corrected. The family part was secondary. And now? Now you're an employee who consistently demonstrates respect for leadership and contributes to team success. The family part is just a bonus, Jake laughed. You've gotten very good at separating personal and professional relationships. I've gotten very good at not accepting less than I deserve from anyone, regardless of our relationship. We finished the paperwork in comfortable silence, and I reflected on how much had changed since the day I first bought Corner Café. The initial motivation had been partly revenge, partly proving a point, partly claiming space that had been denied to me, but somewhere along the way, the motivation had evolved into something healthier. I wasn't building businesses to prove my worth to my family anymore. I was building them because I enjoyed the challenge, because I was good at it, and because it provided value to customers and employees. The software business now operated independently of my need for validation. The cafes had become gathering places for the community, employing local residents and supporting other small businesses. My success had expanded beyond personal vindication to become something that benefited others. Can I ask you something? Jake said as we prepared to leave. Do you ever regret how things happened? The firing, the family drama, all of it? I considered the question carefully. I regret that it was necessary. I regret that we couldn't have found a healthier way to address the family dynamics. But I don't regret standing up for myself or establishing boundaries, even though it hurt people. Especially because it hurt people. The hurt forced everyone to examine patterns that weren't working. Without that disruption, we'd probably still be stuck in the same dysfunctional cycle. So the confrontation was ultimately helpful. The confrontation created space for growth. Whether people chose to grow was up to them. Jake nodded thoughtfully. I'm grateful you fired me. Really? It forced me to examine my assumptions about success, about you, about myself. I wouldn't have done that voluntarily. As we walked to our cars, I thought about the journey from that first day of serving coffee while secretly building a business empire. The girl who had hidden her success to avoid threatening other people's egos had grown into a woman who built success openly and invited others to join her. The transformation hadn't been easy or linear. It had required confronting family members, establishing boundaries, and accepting that not everyone would approve of my choices. But it had also led to relationships based on genuine respect rather than assigned roles. The family photo from the cafe opening would replace the graduation photo on Mom's mantelpiece. But more importantly, it represented a new chapter in how we related to each other. We were no longer stuck in childhood patterns of favoritism and dismissal. We were adults who had learned to see each other clearly and appreciate each other's unique contributions. My business empire would continue growing. But so would my capacity for building healthy relationships on my own terms. The success was satisfying, but the respect was priceless. And the best part? I'd achieved both by refusing to make myself smaller so others could feel bigger. I'd achieved both by insisting on being seen as I actually was, not as others thought I should be. Calf lights dimmed behind us as we drove away, but the future ahead was brilliantly illuminated with possibilities I was finally free to pursue.